Now in today's video, we're going to be looking at some of my top transfer targets ahead of Game Week 21. Of course, we're going to be running through all the team data as well you need to make the best decisions this upcoming game week. Now, before we dive into today's video, of course, if you do enjoy any of the content that you see on the channel, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, as we are trying to hit 12.5k subscribers by the end of the season, and it is only possible with your guys' amazing support. As always, with our transfer targets videos, I like to start off taking a look at next game week's fixtures. Of course, we are using the Fantasy Football Hub kind of predicted goals and clean sheet odds kind of tool. If you want to go and check this out for yourself, I will leave a link to their amazing website. First thing to note is, of course, the Premier League isn't there next weekend. It is the FA Cup. Then, of course, we start with a midweek game week. Don't worry, I will be live for that one with a deadline stream as always, but just, I would say, hold off on making any early transfers. Of course, there's still Premier League games to go. Then we've still got a week where players can pick up injuries in training. Then, of course, the FA Cup starts on Thursday, and then, you know, that's what I mean. There could be lots of injuries during that time period, as obviously all the Premier League clubs are involved. Now, a lot of the players will be rotated and stuff like that. However, I would recommend this week just being a little bit patient. Maybe have to eat up a couple price decreases or increases, but I think that little bit of patience is definitely going to pay virtue, especially with the FA Cup coming up. If some of those big players get injured that you bring in, that could be an absolute disaster. So maybe, like I said, just being a little bit more patient this week. Wait until the Tuesday deadline. No deadline on Saturday. It is, of course, FA Cup weekend. In terms of the fixtures, though, for that midweek round, of course, Liverpool versus Forest. Probably a lot of people are going to be looking at Mohamed Salah in terms of captaincy again. I actually think I'm probably going to maybe go against that. I think that's going to be an extremely difficult fixture for Liverpool and for Nottingham Forest as a whole. For Salah, as a whole, because purely Nottingham Forest are a pretty good defence so far. Third for XG conceded so far in the Premier League. I think as well the Chelsea-Bournemouth game. Bournemouth have been really, really good in the expected goals column as well. I believe they're 5th or 6th in terms of that market as well. So again, going to be a really difficult test for both Cole Palmer and, of course, Mohamed Salah. Arguably, I think if you do have Erling Haaland, he looks like one of the top captaincy options for me going up against Brentford. They're a very, very weak defence. Well, I know they got a very positive result today. However, again, they're still one of the worst 5 sides for expected goals conceded. We've also got the North London derby as well, so there's no real attackers I'd be absolutely dying to have from, of course, Arsenal. However, Spurs defensively are still looking pretty ropey, so maybe Gabriel Jesus might be potentially worth a little bit of a pickup. And then Manchester United, Southampton. So if you have held on to Ahmed and, of course, Bruno Fernandes, it could pay dividends in Game Week 21. Let's go ahead and take a look at the 11FI data for clean sheets over the next few weeks. As you can see, Arsenal clear by a country mile yet again. I spoke about this quite a lot already in length. Now, the Arsenal-Brighton game is currently taking place, so of course, if any players do pick up injuries, do just ignore what I'm about to say. However, I have been mentioning this to you guys, that if you have just one Arsenal defender, it's currently not good enough to actually get you positive rank gain. You're probably going to need to be looking at 2, maybe even 3 Arsenal defenders. Now, their XG conceded so far over the past 5 game weeks has been phenomenal. Over the course of the Premier League as well, they're sat second just behind Liverpool. So you're buying into a really good defence, really good projected numbers coming up as well. And that is the only way that realistically you're probably going to get any rank gain, other than maybe Gabriel scoring goals. If they all keep a clean sheet and nobody gets any kind of attacking returns, you're not really looking at too much in terms of gains. Now, Liverpool's numbers are really good. However, the thing that I would say is they're going to be competing in 4 competitions within the next 30 days. They've got, of course, the Champions League, which they can rotate a little bit. They're in a very advantageous position in that one. Of course, they've got the Premier League, they've got FA Cup, and of course, they do have Carabao Cup. So maybe potentially might not be worth looking to invest into that Liverpool defence. I'm thinking Trent maybe could be subject to some rotation. Of course, there's going to be transfer rumours as well. Might potentially be worth a little bit of a miss. City are still up here. However, I would not be investing in City. Post Game Week 22, their fixtures really, really fall off a cliff. And I would say as well, it seems like they just can't keep clean sheets at the moment. They really need some better investment into that back line. Fulham are a team I'm going to be looking at going forward as well in the next few weeks with some good projected numbers as well. Forest are up there as well, so Aina, Mikulenkovic, all going to be very worthwhile buys into. This is, of course, the ideal hop-on point as well for Daniel Mudos as well in terms of his clean sheet numbers, and because he's just involved in absolutely everything as well. So he's an absolute must for me going forward. Same with probably Lewis Hall as well. He's another defender I'm going to be looking at over the next few weeks. Some really, really strong clean sheet percentage opportunities for Newcastle. I know they didn't keep one today. However, 4 consecutive clean sheets prior to that as well, with some good defensive numbers coming up, I definitely think could be worth a little bit of investment. In terms of teams I probably would be avoiding, of course, your relegation threatened sides. Then probably West Ham and Brentford, pretty poor in terms of XG conceded. Same with Spurs and Manchester United as well, all worth avoiding over the next 5 game weeks for me, and it is kind of those topper teams that I've kind of gone through and mentioned that are definitely worth some sort of investment in terms of defence. Let's move on then. Let's take a look at the projected goal involvement numbers. Liverpool leading the way, of course, with the appetising fixtures in 23 and 25. Of course, though, the problem, again, like I said, is going to be the fact that they've got so many games coming up in January, and picking one of those players that realistically you've got 6 players fighting it out for 3 spots. Salah's not probably going to be dropped in any of the Premier League games, so you are then looking at 5 players fighting over 2 spots. Is it really worth your time and attention? I'm probably going to say not. I know Diaz is pretty decent and people like him. Gakpo's obviously been playing games. However, Jota has been building his fitness. These cup games as well will help him to, start more and more games. Same with Darwin Núñez as well. So I think going for a Liverpool attacker right now outside of Salah, just not something I think I'm going to be able to do. Arsenal's numbers are pretty decent as well. Gabby Jesus is probably the only option I would consider out of their attackers. The rest just don't really excite me. Cities, as we can see here, are okay for 22, 23. Then they do start to drop off a little bit with more difficult fixtures on the horizon. I actually think their numbers might even drop a little bit lower than this in the next 11FI update, with some pretty good performances coming up for, Liverpool and stuff like that. And Newcastle's resurgence in terms of form as well. As you can see there, Newcastle really, really good for the next 4. So definitely Isak, Gordon, going to be on people's menus and radars for the next few weeks as well coming up. Spurs have got some okay-ish fixtures coming up, and I definitely think Dominic Solanke might be a potential Jackson replacement if you want to go down that route as well. United have got some okay fixtures from an attacking perspective, so maybe if you did hold on to Bruno Fernandes, or of course if you've still got Ahmed, could be worth maybe keeping, of course, for that Southampton fixture as well. One of the best for projected goals. I think that's the 3rd best projected goals in match day 21 as well. Fulham are about to go on a pretty decent run, so again, probably worthwhile some investment there. Same with Crystal Palace, Mateta and Eze as well, also looking like very, very worthwhile options. That was the team data. Let's head on into some players I'm going to be recommending ahead of game week 21. Diving into the first 2 players I wanted to talk about, of course, it is going to be Bryan Mbeumo and Wissa. Very, very good in today's game against Southampton. However, how much does that really mean against a very, very poor Southampton side? I think Bryan Mbeumo probably is going to be a player that is on a lot more people's radars. Still very, very highly owned, and I do expect that to continue despite 2 difficult fixtures coming up for him and Brentford, Manchester City and Liverpool at home. I think the advantage is the fact that both of those fixtures are at home. Of course, Brentford having a very, very strong home record this season. Very, very good in terms of those big 6 sides as well. I think they pretty much beat every big 6 side since being promoted to the Premier League. Obviously, they did the double over Manchester City as well 2 seasons ago. And I think with City's poor defensive record, it might not be the worst fixture in the world for Bryan Mbeumo and, of course, Johan Wissa and Brentford. I think the Liverpool one, I probably would maybe look to drop both of these players. And then post that, game week 23 is where the fixtures really, really start to get very delicious and very, very tasty. And I do feel that right there, game week 23, is of course going to be the ideal hop-on point for the Brentford attackers. That for me seems like the right time to, of course, go and buy into them. Buying in ahead of City and Liverpool doesn't really make ideal sense for me, to be honest. I know they're both home fixtures, but Liverpool, like I've spoke about, a really, really good defence. City, I do think there could be goals in that game, but would I really want to be playing a Bryan Mbeumo in that one? Probably not. Or would I want to be playing a Wissa? Again, probably not. I'd be looking at other players elsewhere. So like I said, I think the ideal ideal hop-on point for both of these players is going to be game week 23. Of course, between them, they've got over 25 goal contributions as well this season. Both of them are absolutely exceptional. I've owned both of them at large parts of this season as well. Both have basically saved my season at large points. Bryan Mbeumo with another masterclass today, 2 goals and an assist. You're basically buying a player that plays 90 minutes, is on penalties, and plays for a team that can attack and can score goals. What more could you possibly want for his price point? Absolute gem. And like I said, Wissa, I think we monitor his performances over the next few weeks, see how he gets on, and I think if he's still looking pretty decent come game week 23, maybe he's got a goal involvement, or maybe been very, very close and putting up good underlying data, I think game week 23, I potentially could see myself adding or re-adding Wissa back to my starting 11. But let me know what your plans are for Bryan Mbeumo down in the comments section. Keeping with the kind of midfielder theme, Anthony Gordon, a player that I highlighted last week and I said, you know what, it's probably a really, really good week to buy into him with some great fixtures on the horizon for Newcastle United. We saw with the 11FI projected goal involvement numbers as well. Really, really good set, and I've always been a massive fan of Anthony Gordon as well. Back-to-back home fixtures against Wolves and Bournemouth. I think the Bournemouth game might be a little bit tricky. However, Southampton and Fulham as well, some great fixtures in there. You really, really can't lie it. I know his data doesn't look absolutely exceptional. However, I spoke about this last week and I did say that Anthony Gordon for me feels like one of those players that is just a natural high quality finisher where he doesn't need a kind of high XG opportunity to go and get himself a goal, and we saw that from his absolutely wonder goal last weekend as well. Again, another strong performance from him today, and like I said, for me, I think I would be very, very tempted to go and pick up Anthony Gordon over Bryan Mbeumo for the next few fixtures. Like I said, I think that point to go and pick up Bryan Mbeumo is going to be game week 23. And if I was in the market for a midfielder, I think I probably would go and pick up Anthony Gordon for those next 3. Then maybe you look to sell Anthony Gordon at the City game, and then maybe look to bring in Bryan Mbeumo or post Southampton. That could be a period to do that. But right now, if I had to pick between the two, I probably personally would go for Anthony Gordon as well. A player that I briefly mentioned as well with Palace in terms of the 11FI numbers is also Eze and Sarr. They've also got some good fixtures coming up over the horizon. However, I don't feel either of those players have the capability to go and get consistent, or at least fairly consistent, double-digit hauls compared to Anthony Gordon and Bryan Mbeumo as well. I think Gordon edges it for me over the fixtures over the next few weeks out of all of those options. Then once the 2 difficult games are out of the way for Brentford, I do feel like Bryan Mbeumo does become that top option in midfield again. Like I said, it just is the consistency, it's the fact and the way that Brentford play, and it's the fact that he's got penalties as well, which is an absolute goldmine. But for right now, I do think I slightly favour Anthony Gordon over Eze and Bryan Mbeumo for the next 3 fixtures at least. Let's continue then. Let's move on to the next player I want to talk about. Again, within that midfield bracket, it seems like we're getting a few decent options starting to emerge here. It is going to be Savinho. I was tempted to include him in last week's video. However, I went against it. I thought, nah, people will be giving me absolute pelters in the comments. Another very, very impressive performance from him today. Very, very good numbers that he's been putting up over the past 5 to 6 game weeks. Actually, one of the best players in terms of per 90 data over that past 5 to 6 game weeks, like I said. And as you can see here, 4 assists, 1 goal as well. Very, very decent stuff from him. The next 2 fixtures are very, very appetizing for Manchester City. However, they do start to take a little bit of a dip. I think Chelsea are in different form at the moment, and definitely a team that can be kind of dealt a little bit of a rough hand and stuff like that. Arsenal and Newcastle, I think, are probably going to be difficult games for City, so it probably would be only maybe a free game week punt. You could of course play him in the Newcastle game if you really, really wanted to. And I do think that goes for all City assets as a whole. We'll talk a little bit more about Haaland a little bit later, but yeah, I think that goes for City assets as a whole, to be honest, is they do have the next 2 fixtures, which are great. They're playing against 2 of the worst sides for XG conceded, 2 bottom half sides for that metric as well. And I do feel like Savinho's performances are dragging Manchester City up a little bit in terms of his, the overall team play. He's obviously doing exceptionally well with his link-up play with Erling Haaland as well. So he is making the team a lot better. And I do feel like if you are maybe in the market for a little bit of a differential over the next few weeks, he could be the man. However, those fixtures are not as tempting as probably they first seem. And I think that goes for the next man as well that we're going to talk about. Of course, he bags a brace I told you guys, like I told you last week, I was like, look, Haaland's got these good games. If you want to bring him in, probably last week or the week before was the time to do it. I think right now is not probably going to be the week I would be looking to bring Erling Haaland in. I think the next three are okay. Then Arsenal and Newcastle. And like I've spoke about with Erling Haaland and his price point, is you need to be captaining him to get the full value out of him. And realistically, you're probably only going to captain him in maybe game week 22. He could be a decent option in game week 21 as well. So if you were going to go down that route, maybe could be worth it. However, I feel like a lot of us haven't had Haaland for a while, haven't really got the budget or the transfers to get back to Erling Haaland either. So is it worth ripping apart your team to have probably the best captain for maybe 2 weeks? I don't really think it's going to be worth it. I genuinely don't. I think he can continue to still score his braces and do whatever. And I think, you know, people might potentially look to bring him in. However, City's fixtures post that Chelsea game are really, really difficult. It's a run of around 4 to 5 games where it's not easy. No real givers. No real kind of, you know, you think, oh, Haaland's an absolute banker at that point. There is a period where I do feel like we could potentially own Erling Haaland yet again further down the line. However, I don't think that is right now. And I don't think this is the ideal hop-on point for him. So if you were looking at him after today's brace, I think probably now is not the right option. It's going to require quite a bit of hokey-pokey with your team, obviously ripping it apart, bringing in certain players, removing certain players, obviously using up transfers as well. And especially if you're not going to be captaining him over the next 3 game weeks, is it really worth it? Probably not for me. I think you've got Alexander Isak as the best forward there in terms of numbers, in terms of the Premier League over the past 5 to 6 game weeks, and probably you could mark that back to 10 game weeks as well with Alexander Isak. I would prefer an Isak and then spreading my funds out a little bit more. I think that is going to be more beneficial for your side rather than using Erling Haaland and obviously eating into that big budget. However, it would not surprise me to see him go and pick up a couple of goals against Brentford, Ipswich and Chelsea over the next few game weeks. But like I said, maybe we just have to weather this storm and look for the next point where we do enter Erling Haaland. And obviously, Manchester City signed some players in January as well. I do think it will make them a lot better of a side. However, right now, I still don't think I'm 100% convinced, and something that I'm not going to be recommending to you guys to do. But I knew I was probably going to get some questions asked about it, of course, with off the back of him scoring a brace. Let's move on then. Let's take a look at the 11FI projected goal involvement over the next few weeks, as we can see here, for the next 5 game weeks. Salah and Palmer looking really, really good. Obviously, I spoke about Erling Haaland. Those next 3, of course, going to be his ones. But if you're looking at that, probably not the best captaincy option this week. It's looking like Palmer in terms of those projected goal involvement numbers. Then in match day 22, you're probably going with Palmer again. Then in match day 23, you're going to go for Mohamed Salah. So over that period there, not really going to be a clear captaincy option, is he? So yeah, again, is it really worth ripping apart your team? Probably not. Especially when you could get yourself an Isak, or you've already got an Isak who's got very, very consistent projected goal involvement numbers here over the next 5 game weeks as well. Eze is a player that we briefly mentioned there. Another assist for him today as well. Crystal Palace about to go on this really, really good run. Jean-Philippe Mateta as well, also sneaking onto that list. He could be a decent Jackson replacement as well, with some good, steady projected goal involvement numbers for both of those two over the next few weeks. Some decent fixtures coming up for Crystal Palace as well. Anthony Gordon, a player we spoke about, again on this list, as we can see right here as well. So some good numbers coming up for him over the next few weeks. Bryan Mbeumo, we are seeing him on this list, but like I said, it isn't until really match day 23 that those numbers really start to boost up in terms of him as a potential option. And like I said, I do feel like that is probably going to be the ideal hop-on point for him, rather than joining into City and Liverpool back-to-back. I know the home fixtures, but for me personally, probably does feel like match day 23 is going to be that ideal hop-on point for Bryan Mbeumo and any other potential Brentford assets. That is going to round up today's transfer targets video. Of course, if you did enjoy the video, make sure you're liking, subscribing, all that good stuff, and good luck in game week 21.